Nigeria's National Assembly has sent a 2022 appropriation bill to President Muhammadu Buhari for assent. Some individuals who do not have the authority to speak have also confirmed that Mr. Buhari may sign the appropriation bill on Friday, December the 31st. The House of Representatives and the Senate passed the federal government's budget last week, raising the total estimates from the proposed 16.391 trillion to 17.126 trillion naira. The oil benchmark was raised from the proposed $57 per barrel to $62 per barrel. Still on legislative matters, the governor of Northwestern Kaduna State, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, says President Buhari is justified in refusing to give his assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. In an exclusive interview with Arise News, Mr. El-Rufai gave reasons why he supports the president's veto.
Well, look, let me give you my personal opinion, okay? And then I'll try to debunk some simplistic assumptions by certain people about these direct primaries and indirect primaries, okay? First, I want to say, for everyone to hear loud and clear, President Buhari has always been an advocate of direct primaries. From our days in the CPC through to the last primaries in 2018, when he ran for the second time, we used direct primaries. So ideologically and personally, President Buhari prefers direct primaries to indirect primaries because he believes that direct primaries is one that gives party members greater participation in deciding who is their candidate, rather than a few elected people and delegates that can be susceptible to corruption. But what do we have here? What we have is a piece of legislation that mandates only one method of getting candidates to emerge in the party. It is not a bad method, okay? If you can have 4 conditions precedent in place, direct primaries is the best form of primaries. The 4 conditions are: 1, you must have a membership register that is open, that everyone agrees is the real membership register of the party. Okay? That's the first thing. Secondly, you need every member that is in that register to have a biometric card with barcode so that he can be easily identified before he can vote in the primaries. Okay? So we need to produce cards very similar to INEC voters card, or the same quality. Thirdly, you must have a system or a mechanism for counting the votes in the direct primaries that everyone has confidence in. Okay? And fourthly, you need security to prevent non-members from coming into the venue to vote or thugs being imported to disrupt the voting. Okay? If you don't have these 4 conditions, direct primaries will be a disaster.
All right, Tunde, your take on this. He's enunciated, 4 points. I know you want to jump on that.
Okay, you want me to start with El-Rufai? Well, Cal Surprise, a governor, agrees with the fact that President Buhari withheld his assent. Shock, horror, hardly. Of course he does. We've all heard about the position of the governors on that issue. But the point he's making, while valid, is not really the point, is it?
Yes.
The point is that we need to move forward and deepen our electoral reform. It needs to be a continuous process. The extant law in Nigeria remains the Electoral Act of 2010, which really at this point is looking at obsolescence. We're now in 2022 practically. So President Buhari, what people are saying, I think the critics, He has his supporters, of course, like the governor's forum. But the critics are saying that why didn't he do what he did with the PIA and just sign an imperfect piece of legislation, just so that we can move the needle?
Yes.
I hate repeating myself. I tend to do that on this show. One does tend to sound like a broken record. In my private life, I promise you, I just don't repeat myself. But what I've said before, it's inelegant, but it's effective. President Buhari gave his assent to the PIA in August, and everybody cheered, not because we all thought the PIA was perfect, but because it was just a sign of progress, which is desperately needed at this point. In September, the ink was barely dry. He was already back asking for amendments. That could have been done. From his letter, it is quite clear that the president only objects to that issue of the imposition of direct primaries on all political parties, which I think a lot of people object to, because it just flies in the face of internal democracy. People should have any kind of means, as long as it's above board, it's monitored, approved by INEC and what have you, you can have direct, indirect primaries. I think that's fine. But just sign the bill so that the other important components, the baby, electoral transmission and what have you, don't get thrown out with the bathwater. I think that's been established. As for the budget, I mean, yes, they've transmitted, the National Assembly has transmitted it to the president, and the president is going to sign on December 31st. Really took it right down to the wire, but at least the president is maintaining this trend of this past, well, the second term of President Buhari's administration. You recall the first term, we're having budgets being passed in May, June, you know, but now this time we really have established that January-December budget cycle, which is important. And I also want to raise the fact that the House of Reps, a bill has passed, I believe, second reading, and Honorable Abbas, his bill, the National Budget Bill, which is seeking to not make this a Buhari administration thing. We don't want the next president to come in and perhaps have the fractious relationship we saw between President Buhari and the 8th National Assembly. Then we go back to having the budget passed in May, which is, you know, ridiculous. We want to really enshrine that in law, that January to December budget cycle. And I don't want to start talking about the the projections. 3.8 trillion on debt servicing. Yikes.
I mean, Tunde, you said it all. But I'll start with the views enunciated by the governor, Governor Nass El-Rufai. I can have counter-arguments for every point made. You talk about security. Great. There is massive insecurity. The political process will not deepen the problem of insecurity. People get kidnapped without even going to a polling booth to go cast their vote in a direct primary in the first place. People get burnt in a bus while they're traveling. So when people enunciate the views on insecurity, I look at them, I laugh. But there's an antidote to insecurity. There is technology. Why can't you use technology full throttle? Why can't you have a portal? But you did electronic registration of your party members. INEC is taking data of people online as the first step of the continuous voters registration. Why can't you have a portal where your members that are registered with an accredited code can vote online? Now we have virtual NIN numbers, don't we? Yeah, the NIN numbers, which is a direct capture of the data of a lot of people. Why can't you extrapolate the data from the NIN and open up a portal and give people a specific code, a one-time password to be able to cast their vote? And don't come with a hoodoo about technology. We all saw Johnson Chukwu, our friend Chief Johnson Chukwu, in the same village where a lawmaker said that there was no internet, with 4G internet talking to us live and direct. We have seen the argument from INEC that you can work with a telecoms company to deepen this. INEC has said they can deploy. So when I hear these arguments, it falls short for me. You have said it all. The baby should not be thrown away with the bathwater. We didn't think about direct or indirect primaries. What the politicians do is not our concerns as people. We don't care about your shenanigans. What we care about is that elections should be done electronically. We should be able to transmit results because it will bring about a level of veracity to it. And that's what we want, because we know that it is hard to manipulate technology. Not saying technology doesn't have its own challenges, but to a large extent, we have seen it work. And the elections that brought this incumbent government to power in 2015 was because we had something called the card reader. Albeit that on the election day, didn't work for the man that signed it in. But he kept faith with the process.
I remember that.
We all remember that, how President Goodluck Jonathan tried and tried and tried, and the cadre didn't work for him. But we never lost faith in the technological process. And we know that when we improve on technology, we can deepen the electoral process. Real quickly to the budget. When I look at the numbers, and I look at every budget, at first I ask, how have we run all the budgets effectively? Kudos to the government on the January-December budget cycle. Very laudable one. I commend the Buhari administration for that. But also the part I look at is the debts. Is what we're losing to servicing debts, is the deficit. The more debt we are taking to fund the budget. A lot of people argue, do we even need a 17 trillion budget? Can we account for what we have spent in the past? The humanitarian ministry is taking close to billions out of this budget, close to $1 billion or thereabouts. Can we account for that effectively? Where is the social registrar? What impact has it had on people? Can we directly say the 5,000 that are given to people have brought XYZ out of poverty? If you check povertyclock.io, doesn't the poverty number keep increasing? Can we say what we have spent before has really pushed the needle in terms of infrastructure? I'll give it to the government. They argue that they're doing a lot of infrastructure. We've seen Lagos-Ibadan Railway. We've seen other. But has it fed into the GDP growth and development? There's another big argument about how infrastructure feeds into growth and socioeconomic development of the people. So we should ask ourselves those questions critically. And how can we block corruption across the ministries? Because you see, a lot of this money is a funnel to the MDAs. The Auditor General raised a concern about certain trillions of naira missing from the MDAs. We have not talked about that. They said they were reconciling accounts. They saw a loophole of trillions of naira.
There's always...
So there's always corruption, but good one. And I think we should look at the headwinds carefully in 2022 before we increase the forecast for oil. I think it's best we have a very conservative forecast of $7 per barrel, rather than nudging up to $62 per barrel. Anything can happen in 2022.
But I thought that we were doing better with oil prices since Omicron has proved to be less scary than initially assumed. You know, the price dropped like 10% last month, but it's improved.
You never know what variant. You never know what variant will come in 2022.
Oh Lord!
You never know what will happen.
Now that you mention it.
All right. Thank you so much. That's all on News Headline. We take a short break. When we return, we'll have Rotus, Oderi, and Adiso Omora to give us updates on Africa business and COVID-19 activities across the globe. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotus Oderi is here to give us an African business update. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Tundu.
Remember, we call you dependable.
Yes. It puts a lot of pressure.
Don't let the side
down. Good morning to all of you. Yeah, you get it, right? It puts a lot of pressure on, but we're able. Speaking of being dependable, the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission put out a survey. They do this annually, where they look at the sectors that have not been dependable on for Nigerians and have, topped consumer complaints. So this year, 2021, power was the top complaints draw, if you will, for Nigerians in 2021, according to the Chief Executive Officer of the FCCPC, that's Mr. Babatunde Irukera. So power was first up on the list. I mean, think about it. Estimated billing, consumers not being able to top up their meters, blackouts, the discos were on the receiving end of a lot of angry Nigerians. Second place was banking, as far as people trying to make transfers and the transfers not going through, going to ATMs to make withdrawals and the money not coming out and not being debited, and then having to go and resolve issues at the banks. Aviation and telecommunications were vying for third place. Aviation came pretty close to pushing telecommunications to fourth place. So folks, at airports, flights being canceled, not getting refund from airlines for delayed flights or for canceled flights outright, having to stay at airports for a really long time. And then, of course, telecommunications, was also there as well. People trying to top up airtime and not being able to, to get the airtime, being debited for it. So I think there's an argument to be made, though, for the infrastructure challenges that this country has. You can pick any sector. If you pick telecommunications, doesn't matter whether you port from here to there. There's still the issue of dropped calls, bad networks, not being refunded for airtime that's been lost, and so on and so forth. No need to name any telecommunications companies, but you don't have enough of a proliferation of cell phone towers across the country. If you think about ISPs, internet service providers, a lot of them piggyback on the cell towers that are available. They claim to have coverage in different areas of Lagos, but if you get one particular, Wi-Fi service from a particular, company, probably they claim it will work here, it doesn't. So infrastructure plays a role in the complaints we're seeing. Peak power, not enough meters have been going around. There's still a lot of estimated billing. The grid isn't enough to, as far as generation capacity and transmission across the country. That's not there. So you continue to see those issues. Banking, financial services, there's also network issues. If you try to make a transfer with your phones, if one of us sends money to the other, there might be an issue. That's also, that's broadband, that's also internet connectivity. So not to absolve any of these companies in these different sectors, from power to banking to aviation, but it's part of what doing business in Nigeria is. That's the reality. So they can do better. And again, the FCCPC, uses this survey to chronicle. I think they said that there were about 32,000 complaints for the full year, which comes out to about, 87 or 88 complaints a day. But that's what we're seeing. So until we get an improvement in infrastructure for these different sectors, I think this is something that's going to continue into the new year. They did mention that a number of those complaints were resolved. We go to climate. Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu was at a initiative for planting trees, and he mentioned the fact that Lagos State has planted about, I believe he said it was 8 million trees in 13 years. This was at the Evergreen Project Lagos. It's a brainchild of Miss Mahika Gupta, who kicked off a 1,000 tree planting project in Lagos. So I think we even have a clip from the governor, if we can take a listen to that.
That's why planting of a tree, ensuring that we can reduce carbon footprints, we can reduce emission in a congested city like ours, becomes a deliberate effort or a deliberate solution that we must all support. And so that's why, as a government, I'm happy to announce that it might not be very apparent, and we probably had not watered all of them enough, but since 2008, we've planted over 8 million trees. It might not be very apparent, but we've done that. That's why.
All right, so that's Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who of course was addressing Lagosians, saying that of course more can be done with respect to tree planting, but trees absorb the carbon emissions that is put out there by vehicles, air conditioners, airplanes, and so on and so forth. So more trees need to be planted. But if you think about Africa Energy Week in Cape Town in early first week of November, if you think about all the conversations around climate change, the second-hand cars, the generators, diesel and fuel, there's a lot more. Planting trees is not going to be enough. I mean, a lot more has to be done in this respect. So, I mean, good on him, good on Lagos State, but what about other governors? Lagos is just, he even mentioned in there that Lagos is 0.36% of the entire size, as far as size is concerned, of the rest of the country. So what are the other governors doing, especially in the Niger Delta region, if you think about all the emissions and so on and so forth? So it's a collective effort that's needed nationwide. Finally, in Senegal, they've launched a express train, $1.3 billion here. It is part of their own economic development plan to increase infrastructure across Senegal. Dakar is 0.26% of the entire country, yet is responsible for, I think, about 12 to 15%, almost or more, of economic activity. So this also has a climate initiative in reducing the amount of people that move on roads. The train was launched, today's Wednesday, was launched yesterday, I believe, or Monday. So it's a new initiative, part of the president's plans to increase infrastructure spend across. This is a fast train, pretty fast. And well, there you go. That's Senegal, by the way, 2% inflation in Senegal. I mean, a small country, but a very
Dakar to Diamniadio.
Yes,
Good
Diamniadio.
for them.
Right.
Congratulations. But they're behind us.
They are.
I'm going to be smug for a second, okay, and just really bask in being ahead of Senegal.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the emergent plan, we're ahead of them.
Yes.
Good. I'm sorry.
I like how we always put every country always puts it in a Nigeria context.
We are competitive bunch.
Competitive.
Yeah, we just are. But you know, there's always going to be issues, and what we tend to hear in Nigeria is, you know, loans from China. But over in Senegal, the problem that they're facing is regarding compensation for the people who had to be evicted from their homes, like tens of thousands of people. Compensation, rehousing, that program has not been seamless.
You mean when the rail line was...
Yes,
okay,
you know, you have to get out of the way of progress,
Right,
you know. But you have to compensate people, and they actually went a step further, the Senegalese government, and promised to rehouse them, and that hasn't been done. You know, in the defense of the government, those people, some people don't have the documentation. So you can't really make a claim. If you don't have the documentation and you have a valid claim, it's unfortunate. I think you're just going to end up with the short end of the stick, frankly. Unfortunately.
That's the informal sector argument.
It's sad.
Indeed.
But your story about Lagos State, you're completely right. It's great to see, you know, some kind of lip service, at the very least, being paid to the disaster, the impending disaster of climate change. I watched one of those, you know, apocalyptic movies recently, and I'm still quite traumatized. I'm so scared. But we have a huge problem in the Chad Basin, the Lake Chad Basin, that's actually causing part of the security problem that we're facing in this country. Apart from the complete lunatics on the extreme end of, you know, Islam, we have the herders who have no place to go, and they're coming down south, you know, with havoc in their wake because of the erosion in the Chad Basin, deforestation, all kinds of nasties. So I do hope the government pays attention, because we're talking about Lagos just really being a small part of the problem. And you're completely right. We have a massive problem with the Lake Chad Basin.
I mean, great point, Chindu. For Senegal, congrats, but no congrats.
Congrats, but no congrats.
No congrats. I mean, I'm not always happy about these projects in Africa because it misses the point. What's the point? I'm not saying infrastructure is not good, but there needs to be a socioeconomic development.
Okay.
That project cost about 1.4 billion US dollars.
Yep.
It's loan. Senegal's GDP is $24 billion.
Okay.
You are taking close to 18% of your GDP to do just one rail project.
Yeah, but Rufai, they need the rail, though.
Hang on a minute. Let me break it down.
Yeah.
Debt to GDP ratio is 70% in Senegal. I will be more excited if a lot of this resource stays in Africa if we develop skill to build this infrastructure in Africa.
Right.
I'll be more happy if Senegalese built it and keep the money here rather than Alstrom taking the money out. That's always my problem.
Okay.
I look forward to that. And you know why? Because you see, in all of this, Africa has been shortchanged on the skills ladder.
Yeah.
And we ought to have gotten to a position now where we are building our infrastructure. The Chinese that you mentioned and the likes that are coming to build infrastructure on the African continent are people that had no rail lines when the Indians were building the first rail lines in the 1800s in the Transvaal region.
But can I ask you?
Yeah.
Do you curse the darkness or light a candle while waiting for
lovely.
Senegal?
Pretty good. I'll use that.
While waiting.
Yeah.
I hope you do.
Yeah.
While waiting for Senegal to get the skills and the funding to get a rails to get their railway intact, because this is the first train since 1960.
Yes.
Since 1960.
And
Nigeria, we've gone so far ahead of them, darling. So far ahead.
Right.
While waiting for them to get their act together, the whole world would have moved on. They have to compete.
They have to compete. This is the first train since 1960, good point. But this is the first train that cost about $3, taking more money out of the pockets of Senegalese. This is the first train that half of the population lives on less than $1 per day. I don't have problems with infrastructure.
Yeah.
But can we look at socioeconomic? Can we look at socioeconomic development?
But see, there's
That's
jobs.
the problem I have with all these infrastructure projects.
True,
in Africa.
but and I know we're taking a lot of time on this one story, but there's a give and take here. There's jobs that will be created, there's revenue that will be generated, there's more trains down the line. I mean, South Africa is the only country, I believe Kenya looked to a South African country to help them build rail infrastructure. So they're the only ones. I mean, where else are you going to go? That's the issue. So there's a give and take.
There's a give and take.
but that's why Africa, we need to upskill.
We do.
Right.
We need to upskill.
Right.
We need to learn those skills
But because
ourselves.
it's not going to happen overnight,
We have to.
we've got to do.
We have to close the gap in the middle.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Okay, for updates on COVID-19 pandemic, and this one more right here with us. So this one, great to have you.
Thank you so much, Rafai. Good morning, and good morning, Tunun. Great to see you as well.
Good morning, Edo
Now, the global
I'm sitting in Dr. Abati's chair, so I have to call you Dr. Abati's name for you at this one.
What a task you have. Thank you so much. Well, oh dear. The global surge of the coronavirus infections continue globally as governments around the world try to strike a balance between restrictions and managing the spread of the Omicron variant. It's a tough job for any government to do, considering that we are 2 years into this pandemic, the economic situation. Roaches and Michael inundated us about all of that. But, it does affect lives, from the young to the old. Everyone is affected by this pandemic, and we'll bring you updates daily. Well, from France to UK, Italy, Greece, Portugal, the US, we are seeing record high numbers, of course, driven by this highly transmissible Omicron variant. The WHO says COVID-19 infection numbers shot up by 11% last week alone globally. Well, in Nigeria, the Center for Disease Control has reported 599 COVID-19 cases and 3 COVID-19 related deaths in the last 24 hours. The latest data from the NCDC also shows a backlog of 194 confirmed cases from the South Delta state. Meanwhile, data from the NPHCDA shows that vaccination against COVID-19 continued across Nigeria in the last 24 hours as well, with an additional 95,582 eligible Nigerians receiving a first jab and another 16,619 people showing up for a second jab. So vaccination continues in Nigeria. It's eligible for anybody 18 years and above, and it is free. Only in Lagos at the moment we have where you have to pay for administration fee in some registered and recognized private labs, private facilities by the Lagos state government. So go out, get your jabs. Well, the World Health Organization is warning that the risk posed by the Omicron variant is still very high and could overwhelm healthcare systems, despite early studies suggesting that the variant is causing milder diseases. Now, the dire warning comes as infections surge, but governments again around the world are divided on how to respond to these rising numbers, as varying degrees of lockdowns and restrictions have come into effect in China and most of Europe just in the last 24 hours. In France as well, in February, we're going to see compulsory remote working for workers in France. So those restrictions and lockdowns we never thought we'll see again are coming into effect. However, they are varied. It's not blankets as they were once upon a time. Well, to the US, where President Joe Biden has formally announced he will lift a ban this week on travel from South Africa and other countries in the region imposed due to the fear of the Omicron variant. You recall that this ban was placed last month at the start of the spread of the variant. Well, in the statement, President Biden says it is no longer necessary to protect the public health and this will end at 12:01 a.m. in Washington on Friday, and that's 5:01 GMT time. The Omicron has now spread to more than 100 countries. Meanwhile, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration says the rapid COVID home tests are more likely to give a false negative with the heavily mutated Omicron variant compared to earlier strains. Now, the health authorities say early data suggests that while the antigen tests do detect the Omicron variant, they may have reduced sensitivity. What is sensitivity? It is a measure of how likely a test is able to detect a positive. And finally, to South Africa, where the government has announced a moment ago it is recalling new isolation and quarantine rules released just last week that no longer required people without symptoms, that is asymptomatic people infected with COVID-19, to isolate or test if they have come in contact with somebody who was positive. Last week, the government gave scientific factors, including the rate of immunity after vaccination, as well as the rate of hospitalization in the country, as reasons why it decided to do that. However, all those protocols will now be recalled after the government says the health department in the country has been inundated with media, stakeholder and public inquiries and comments following the release of the revised regulations. In short, it's a bit confusing for a lot of people in South Africa. Back to you guys.
All right. Thank you so much for the stories, coming out of Africa. One thing is certain as regards COVID-19, is the fact that there are a lot of things we'll never know. When all of this started, the protocol was about quarantining for a specific number of time. Some people say 2 weeks, but now we've been able to have those times. And now with Omicron, that a lot of people don't know a lot about. Yeah, it's spreading, multiplying. I wouldn't even say multiplying. It's spreading so quickly. But the fact is, the sickness or the illness time has dropped tremendously. And this is why there are cases of people that are testing negative in 4 days after the first test of Omicron. And there are cases of people that are testing negative in 7 or 8 days or 9 days. So there's a lot we still need to understand. And when all of these laws are changed, people should understand that we're going through something we don't really even understand in the first place. So I keep going back to that plea for solidarity. Nobody likes to be in a pandemic. God knows nobody likes to be at this stage where they don't have freedoms and all of that. But we have a pandemic, and we all need to come together and fight it. And we fight, from the place of what we know to the things we don't know. I mean, pretty much reminds you of Donald Rumsfeld, known unknowns and known knowns and things like that. So what we know on ground now is, yes, we might have to change and tweak regulations. What we know on ground now is that vaccination works, is empirical. What we know on ground is that wearing face masks does work. What we know on ground is that social distancing works, washing your hands work. So it is for us to hold on to the things we know as we go into the new year. And trust me, there'll be other variants in the new year. We just pray it's not as aggressive as the other variants we've had, less likely, like the Omicron. And mostly, we can start to beat this and find a logical conclusion. But it's still a long journey. Wish us all the best. People should just calm down, especially in South Africa, and just follow the regulations.
Well, I think it's really important what the WHO's Tedros Ghebreyesus is saying about how Omicron, that's touted as mild, or milder comparatively, could still cause severe disruptions, because even if you have the mildest case of COVID-19, you do need to isolate for, the number of days is changing now. It's now 7 days, I think is now the new advice, because like Rufai said, it's changing all the time. There's so many moving parts in this story. So the disruptions are going to be huge. People are still going to be hospitalized because there's still a huge population of unvaccinated people for whom the symptoms might not be mild at all. It's only mild if you're double jabbed, I imagine, because if you don't have any kind of protection, then you're in for a rough ride. So that note of caution needs to be sounded. And I do worry about England. Like I said yesterday, I don't understand what Boris Johnson is doing. The same data that the other kingdoms that make up the UK have assessed and they're acting on. He's putting all his eggs in the vaccination/booster basket. What do you think, Adisa? I don't think you had the chance to really address that. He's banking on booster jabs, and that's it. And life can continue as normal. Do you think that's sufficient?
Well, Boris Johnson says he's following the science here. The care minister says science is being followed. And what do they know? They are following the science that Omicron is milder and, yes, is highly transmissible. But they're also banking on the fact that, jabs are being given, booster jabs, people are showing up. And, of course, they are increasing tests. So if you say, does it make sense? To a certain extent, if you look at the science, he may be right. And you recall that Boris Johnson had promised he was going to save Christmas. He wasn't going to impose new restrictions or lockdowns. So you cannot also rule out the politics of this. He wants to be seen as Santa saving Christmas at this time. I think he may be getting away with it.
All right.
Well, let's hope so.
Thank you so much, Adesua. Fingers crossed.